Geoffrey Lepage wrote in his classic work Parasitic Animals that parasites in nature always do harm to the host. This harm ranges from trivial to death, depending on the parasite. The charming mistletoe falls into the former category, the smallpox virus into the latter. Human parasites may do relatively little harm to disturbed society, or they may be lethal. The petty thief is a parasite on society, contributing nothing, but their effect is localized. Minor corruption in government may not drastically interfere with the running of the country and the quality of life for the people. But these two examples are already illegal and so do not concern us here. It is legalized parasitism that attracts our attention, and this is especially because these are always the really big boys that alter the whole shape of our society and the economy. An obvious example is the banker that is bailed out by a captured government. The sums of money stolen from the people do immense permanent harm, and it is all perfectly legal. Theft on a gigantic scale, but no one goes to jail. The means of wealth extraction which the major parasites use I fully detail elsewhere, but here I will explain how the parasites maintain their iniquitous status in spite of the endless destruction of lives and businesses that they engage in. There is every level of parasitic activity in between the petty thief and the bailed out banker, and here we are concerned with the major parasites like the banker that extract huge amounts of wealth from society without giving anything back. Their activities, currently legal, enable them to amass impossibly obscene fortunes, having no morality or commitment to the good of society, use their wealth to exercise a control quite outside of what we think of as normal political processes, whereby power is given and used. So the question is, why would any people want to be controlled by a group who do not contribute to society, but exploit it for their own narrow interests? Of course they would not, if they knew about it. So the elite work behind the scenes, and although it is pretty obviously there if you look for it, the elite have the means of redirecting your attention. You see the effects in the drain on society, on the economy, in foreign relations. You may even feel an increasing malaise descending over people. You sense a loss of hope. And there are plenty of concrete measures of these available, recording loss of income, increased inequality, and ill health. Many people conclude that this is somehow natural or inevitable, and it's just the way things are. There is nothing more conducive to the well-being of the parasites than a population that feels beaten and where despair is the default outlook on life. The power elite have 5 core methods for maintaining their control. We are, after all, a free society, at least nominally, and so in order for these to work, these methods must not awaken us to the truth of what is happening. We live in a democracy, and so the methods must not disturb our belief in the democratic system. It must appear that the democratic choices we make are real, and the people's vote makes a difference. Despite that, we must not be blasé about democracy and say it is of no value. It is of value, and it is clear that events that have happened relatively recently, for instance, Brexit, the fall of Jeremy Corbyn, the demise of the Lib Dems, the rise of the SNP, and so on, all of them happened because democracy made them happen. Even though democracy can have a significant effect in some areas, it is clear that in others it does not. The rise and rise of the power and wealth of the banks is an obvious example that is untouched by the democratic process, or at least has been until now. The 5 core methods of the parasitic elite are levers of power that are pulled by people who do not owe their position to a democratic vote, and these people are some of the richest and most powerful on the planet. These are the 5 core methods of the power elite: corruption of democracy, control of information, liberal ideology, anti-nationism, war. 1. Corruption of democracy. The elites have an almost infinite amount of money available to use to impress and bribe anyone who has power in government. As soon as anyone attains any kind of power in government, they will be considered of use to the elite. This goes both for elected politicians and those who work permanently in the civil service. Few can resist the blandishments of the elite. Of course, the British elite are clever and, as always, largely unseen. Anyone who finds themselves in a position of power and influence of a reasonably high level will be invited into the exclusive world of the elite, flattered and made to feel important. The benefits of doing the elite's bidding may not be huge during the political career and usually consist of entry to exclusive clubs, expensive treats and outings. The real rewards will follow when the political career is ended. Tony Blair is only one of the highest profile examples of this recently, but if you look at the past political life of almost anyone who has attained high office, the story would be the same. Rewards can take the form of overpaid part-time jobs, grants to foundations, and of course honours, knighthoods and elevation to the lords. It is commonplace for ordinary people to say that politics is sleazy, and anyone who enters the House of Commons will confirm this and tell you that it is controlled by cabals, not the MPs. The general population are suspicious of politicians, and politicians enjoy a low level of trust. This state of affairs does not arise because politicians as a group are different from anyone else. It happens because they are subject to temptations that are uniquely placed in their path. If you wonder why some able people remain on the back benches with no power, it is because they are not corrupt. Our democracy is at the very heart of our society, and we are rightly proud of it and the traditions that go with it. That it is corrupted by an unelected group who can use money to indirectly gain political power is one of the most shameful and sad things about our nation. It is one of the most damaging and dangerous. The corruption of our democracy by the power elite is one reason why we need not be shy of using the word evil in respect of them. And do not fall for the line that there is nothing to be done. Yes, the world is made like that. Greed will triumph over goodness. This is what the elite and their helpers want you to believe. The problem is, as Douglas Carswell shows, that the parasites have in the past always been able to capture society and control it. But that is not inevitable, and the anti-globalist party will demonstrate what must be done. We have now reached the point where it should be clear to all that we can no longer survive with the parasites on our back, controlling every aspect of our lives. The issue of corruption runs through so many aspects of our political and economic life that only the whole new radical constitution can fully address it. Two, control of information. Parasitic activity by its nature is superfluous to the health and prospering of its host. On the contrary, it is always damaging to a greater or lesser degree. A key danger for the parasite is that it will be found out. In this case, the host can take protective measures and reject it. As biological humans, the parasites that attack us are either viruses or bacteria. Both result in illnesses to their human hosts, and these illnesses may be all the way from mild to fatal. The most threatening parasites on our human bodies are those that alter our natural responses to them by attacking our immune systems. Our immune systems are part of the internal information system we have and are vital to our well-being. Once our internal information system is damaged, it will be much more difficult or even impossible for our body to defend itself against a parasitic attack. Likewise, there are also many examples in the plant world of extremely cunning parasitical methods to actually alter the nerve systems of the hosts to accept the parasite as necessary to its existence. Some parasites simply rely on the ignorance of the host. The cuckoo is a familiar example in this. It lays its egg in the nests of the host bird, throws out the host chicks or eggs, and leaves the host to feed and raise its own chick. This strategy relies on the inability of the host bird to understand it is doing the work of the parasite, while at the same time having its own family killed. It is clear that control of information is of greatest importance to the success of the parasite. This is no less true in society than it is in nature. The massive extent of the damage, destruction, loss of wealth and opportunity, and death that the parasitic elites in their societies cause to happen means that they need to have a very firm control on the information that the host society receives for their parasitic activities to be successful. It is the immense wealth that the parasites in advanced societies can obtain that enables them to acquire and run the major news and information outlets that people rely on. And most people are unaware that the ownership of our newspapers, social media and broadcasting is concentrated in the hands of a very small number of individuals. All of these people are members of the elite. The BBC is publicly owned, but it is no less under the control of the parasitic elite, for all its news and information is censored. The truth about the operations of the elite must be suppressed. Many people of the UK live in a state of ignorance as to the evil that their government does in their name around the world. They have, for instance, little knowledge of the evil activities that take place in the City of London, on which its profits depend. These include money laundering, market rigging, insurance selling scams, bankrupting businesses, asset stripping and tax evasion, but only rarely do these surface in the mainstream news. Meanwhile, politicians proclaim what marvels the city does for our economy, so playing their part in the classic parasitic manoeuvre of altering the information system of the unfortunate host. A politician who crosses the City of London will not enjoy a prolonged career, and this is spelled out to them when taking office. What we might call the official misinformation conspiracy is a great part of the control of information exercised by the elite. The great counter to the elite information control today is undoubtedly the internet, and without it you would not be reading this. However, the hopes for freedom of exchange of views and information attached to the social media are being more and more disappointed. Facebook, Twitter and YouTube are now subject to such a degree of censorship that they are highly compromised for conveying anything that does not accord with the elite agenda. Also, it is difficult to be sure about the sincerity of many websites, and numerous spoiler sites have been set up to further confuse the seeker for truth. Incidentally, to counter these problems on the internet, Peter Kello is also going to launch a print newspaper, Chronicle of the Times, which will be given free on the streets and can be ordered by post. This venture is separate from the party, and for more information, go to www.ctt.news. And the anti-globalist party will rely a great deal on real-time meetings to further its aims and provoke discussion and genuine exchanges of opinion and fact. The internet is a marvellous invention, but it has severe limitations. We shall use it in conjunction with the old means of communication, face-to-face and print. Three, liberal ideology. The parasitic elite have their means of direct intervention in the political, social and economic life. Corruption, misinformation, war and others. But for their grip on society to be absolute, They also need to control not just what we think, but how we think. This involves promoting a phony but persuasive ideology. This is the ideology of liberalism. Liberalism is the most persuasive ideology in our society, and this is no doubt in great part due to the control that the elites exercise over what we know and what we don't know. Liberalism has two aspects. Both serve the aims of the parasites. To some, these aspects may seem opposing, but in reality, they are cut from exactly the same cloth. There is, on the one hand, economic liberalism, which appeals to the political right, and there is, on the other hand, social or political liberalism, and this appeals more to people on the left. Thus, liberalism embraces a vast spectrum of opinion, left and right. But to repeat, all this represents the voice of the elite. The right has developed its own liberal creed known as neoliberalism, which is primarily an economic ideology. Neoliberalism has long been with us, but it came into its own when the elite's prime assets of Margaret Thatcher and Ronald Reagan were in power in the 1980s. Neoliberalism did away with a lot of the safeguards that were in place to defend us from excess exploitation by finance and the banks. It financialized the lives of the people through bank deregulation and financialized the running of the state through privatization. It allowed the parasites to capture the greater part of the wealth of society, putting both the people and the state into massive debt with declining incomes. With this transfer of wealth, the parasitic class have maintained their control over us through the core methods of corruption, misinformation, and war. Economic liberalism has come to dominate the academic and, of course, media discourse on economics. The challenge to neoliberalism that is allowed to have a voice comes from the left, the advocates of socialism. Socialism used to mean state ownership of the means of production, but has now more and more narrowed its remit to mean the extension of welfare and social services. This causes the parasites no sleepless nights, as of course they will not be paying for these things. Not only that, there are ways in which the welfare state serves their agenda. The left's feeble economic challenge goes hand in hand with a more robust demand for social political liberalism. This is a stronger card to play, and it must be refuted. However, it is an insidious doctrine that has insinuated itself into the minds of many who are unable to recognize its internal contradictions and its repugnant amorality. Political liberalism at first glance may seem cuddly and inoffensive. It claims that anyone can hold any opinion, whatever, and each opinion is as valid as any other. This is the doctrine of relativism that removes any solid basis for establishing right or wrong, good or bad. This is the amorality consequent on the dominant liberal position, and it is having a devastating effect on our society. We are descending into licentiousness and a disregard for others. This goes hand in hand with economic liberalism with its dog-eat-dog vision of society. Many liberals are sensitive about this hollow core in their adopted ideology, and when they are attacked for it, respond with the knee-jerk cry of fascism. What they mean is that if you try to counter their amorality, you are trying to force on them a positive value. But for them there are no positive values. There are no values of any kind, only opinions that individually have no objective validity. Here we come to the internal contradiction of the liberal position. Although they say there is no value that is superior to any other value, in fact this means there is one viewpoint that is superior, that of liberalism itself. Their whole world view then comes to turn on the superiority of liberalism, and they see allies in those who believe in liberalism and enemies in those who don't. The only thing that has objective value is the ideology that says there can be no objective value. If George Orwell did not cite that as an example of doublespeak, he certainly should have. This means that paradoxically, Liberals are the most intolerant people you could meet. Many of us can recall bruising personal encounters with liberals. How does this liberalism lend support to the elite? Because a parasite by its nature does not share the values of the host. It does not contribute to the beneficial workings of the host. It only exploits them. So, if the host itself rejects the idea that it has values, then it becomes a defenseless prey to the parasite. We have described liberalism as an ideology, but what exactly is an ideology? And do we want to put up an alternative ideology to counter it? The simple answer to the second part is decidedly no. But before going on to that, let us discuss the first part. An ideology is a positivist view of the world and explanation of it. This means that the ideology gives you a rigid understanding of things that allows you to predict how they will interact in the future. Positivism is essentially mechanistic, for it allows no scope for human will to influence events. Positivism is an attempt to impose a scientific understanding on complex features of existence, such as society or perception, where such a rigid scientific approach is inappropriate. We can all understand that the amazing technology we use every day exists thanks to a scientific understanding of the material world. But is this method appropriate to understanding that essential component of activity in society, human behavior? If we are going to reject the methods of ideology and pseudoscience, what method should we use? The answer is that we should focus on ideals, not ideology. An example of such an ideal is freedom. We believe in freedom, not because it fits into a rigid ideology, but because we believe in it for itself. Liberals think they have covered freedom in their thinking by saying you can think or do what you want, but this is only a very limited concept of freedom. It is negative freedom, and so we would argue hardly freedom at all. Freedom, to mean anything, has to be positive freedom as well as negative freedom, and positive freedom or liberty is one of the main ideals we adopt. To lay out clearly the difference between positive and negative freedom, imagine a situation pertaining to your car. The defender of negative freedom will say, look, you can drive your car to any part of the country you wish. There is no one to stop you. But hold on a moment. There are no garages anywhere for me to buy petrol, and so my negative freedom is absolutely of no value. I cannot move with no petrol in the tank. As well as the negative freedom, you need the positive freedom that petrol gives you for the former to mean anything. This is a very simple example, but the point is made. In society, education is an example of positive freedom. Positive freedoms are enablers, and the more enablers we have, the freer we are. Clearly, money is important in this. The parasitic elite, by extracting our wealth, deny us our freedom. Positive freedom also means power, power to effect change and fulfill desires. It must be a central ideal that we hold. The ideology of liberalism is a barrier to freedom and must be opposed and discredited. To confront the parasitic elite, we have to confront its foremost representatives and advocates amongst us, the liberals. We are neither of left nor right nor conservative, nor of any ideology. If there is one central premise of the anti-globalist party, it is this: we can only achieve our ends through the nation. The nation is not simply an end in itself, it is also the means by which we can remove the parasites from our society, and it is the means by which we can rebuild civilization. Through the nation, we become what we are and what we want to be. Liberals want to dismiss the nation as outmoded, saying that we should now turn to international groupings, but we say this to them and people who want to devalue the nation. Through your nation, you have security for your family. Through your nation, you have a legal system to protect your rights and property. Through your nation, you have education. Through your nation, you have been able to work and earn. Through your nation, you can travel the world and be recognized as belonging. Through your nation, you have identity. When push comes to shove, only your nation will look after you. Without your nation, you are 1 inch high. This is true in spite of the many failings of our nation today, and these we fully recognize. The nation has an essence beyond its politics and economics. You know this through your love for your nation, and if you do not love your nation, then you cannot love yourself. Those who despise the nation are also full of self-loathing. There is one more prominent aspect of the modern nation that we have not mentioned. This is democracy. Democracy, for all its imperfections, provides the means by which the people can influence who rules the nation. It is a democratic process that has decided recent events such as Brexit, the humbling of the Labour leadership, and the dismissal of the anti-democratic policies of the Liberal Democrats. In the US, it is democracy that decided in favour of Donald Trump, who, for all his failings, has battled the parasitic deep state elite in that country as no one else would have. Democracy works to make change, however erratically. If it did not, there would be no point in founding this party. Those who are cynical about democracy are the same people who are cynical about their nation. The democratic process in the UK must be improved, but the even greater failings of our constitutional arrangements lie not with democracy, but elsewhere. These failings mean that the parasitic elite can operate virtually unrestrained and can indulge in their wealth extraction processes with little interference by the law of the land. Most of their malign practices are not illegal, but we will make them so, and this can be achieved through the democratic processes that are part of the nation. The elite well understand this, and so they regard, quite correctly, the nation as their enemy. That is why they will always try to undermine it. When the idea of the modern constitutional nation started to take shape in the late 18th and early 19th century, it did so under the banners of liberty, justice, and independence. Only the sovereign nation could guarantee freedom for the people from oppression, prosperity for the future, and peace. It is only the nation that can guarantee these things today. To forget this is folly. The nation does this by bestowing citizenship on its members, and this citizenship entails rights and obligations, all made real by the national democratic constitution. As we have well seen from our experience as a member of the European Union, extra-national authorities cannot be democratic, but are inevitably bureaucratic, and ultimately we have no control over them. The British people have wisely rejected this extra-national government. Our nation is infected by a virulent parasitic class that suck the lifeblood out of our economy and convert the resulting ill-gotten wealth into powerful means of control and governance. The deficiency in our constitutional arrangements means that we fall a helpless prey to this attack. Whereas the preservation of rights and prosperity of the people is only achievable through the nation, the parasites are not so dependent. Their grip extends across national boundaries. The elites are now essentially international, and their networks are international ones. The gathering of the elites at Davos in Switzerland every February is only the most conspicuous manifestation of this. The ability of the parasites to switch their wealth between different countries and island jurisdictions is the key to their power today, and is to a great extent always has been. In spite of all calls for international law and regulation, the simple fact remains that law is ultimately enforced by sovereign nations, albeit sometimes in cooperation with each other. So we are confronted with one simple, uncomfortable fact. Law extends to the national boundary, and not beyond. But the operation of the parasites transcends national boundaries. This puts them out of the reach of any law. But the nation could challenge the international mobility of the elite's riches, as it has done in the past. This is what our sovereign economics is about. There are many aspects to sovereign economics, but key to it are controls on free movement of capital, such as we had until the late 1970s. These were dismantled as part of the neoliberal revolution instigated under Prime Minister Thatcher, and with them the whole paraphernalia of offshore tax havens, selling off industry, multinational conglomerates and global banks has come about. All of this serves the parasitic financial elite, not the people. It was the nation under leaders captured by the elite that opened the door to all this, and it is the nation that can, given the democratic will, close that door again. They tell us that the globalization of capital is inevitable in the modern world. This is nonsense. We accept no such inevitability. We will not see the wealth that is rightly ours sucked out of the body of our nation by parasites. The greatest fear of the parasites, and we see this in nature as well as in human society, is their being found out. Once their cover is blown and the people understand what is happening and why their natural human hopes are constantly being dashed to the ground, the thievery that the elites practice can be stopped. And in this, it is the nation that must play the central role. The nation can mobilize its law and frame its constitution to stop this wealth extraction dead. If the people do not yet know this so well, the financial power elite do. This is why they use all their resources to undermine the nation, discredit it, and try to condemn it to the history books. The battle for Brexit was an epic battle for the nation against those who would destroy it and give free rein to the global elite. That battle was mostly won, but it was in reality but an opening skirmish in the real battle against the elite. We have seen here how the parasitic elite use corruption, misinformation, war, and liberalism to further its aims, and it is clear that we need to add a fifth core method in its armory, the undermining of the nation with the aim of the nation's eventual destruction. The nation is the bitterest foe of the elite and the greatest friend of the people. This explains the anti-nationism of the globalist parasites. We can identify three special aspects of this attack on the nation as follows: multinational organization, immigration, undermining national identity. A. Multinational organizations. Firstly, there is membership of legalistic multinational organizations, of which the EU is a prime example. The World Trade Organization is another, and the Bank of International Settlements is another. We want nothing to do with these. Once you create a multinational pact, it must be governed. It cannot be governed by any one state, so an extra national body has to be created. Now, it is in the nature of the beast that this governing body cannot be democratic in any real sense. It has to be bureaucratic. So the nation gives up power to a remote bureaucracy, and through this, the nation is undermined. This bureaucracy becomes hungry for more power, and so extends its remit more and more, leaving the nation sidelined. Note, here we are talking about multinational legalistic pacts, not bilateral agreements, and not non-legalistic organizations. Let us be clear about this. Bilateral agreements or pacts do not, by their nature, involve any extra national body. Everything is dealt with in discussions solely between the two parties. We are in favour of, for instance, bilateral trading agreements. This is the way to do international relations. With bilateral agreements, no sovereignty is yielded, for if one party wants to modify the accord, they can directly negotiate with the other or simply withdraw. The Brexit saga showed us what it is like to renegotiate or withdraw from a multinational agreement. As regards non-legalistic multinational organisations, we are already member of several. Examples are the European Court of Human Rights, the Civil Aviation Authority, and, I would say, the Commonwealth. Although the UN in general is seen by the globalists as a proto-world government, the UN General Assembly, I would suggest, is a valuable non-legalistic chamber for discussion. It was set up as a non-legalistic organisation, its function being primarily to bestow legitimacy or not on a nation or on a cross-border venture, such as a war. It thus functions as a necessary conciliatory body in times of strife. Such organisations keep open the lines of communications on important matters, practical, social or cultural, but do not involve surrendering sovereignty. The forces aligned in favour of world government are powerful and all come back to the parasitic elite. As we have seen, they wish to undermine the nation state, and the more a nation can be brought under the control of a global superstate, the less independent that nation will be. This connects with the outrageous notion of the New World Order that has been in gestation for over 100 years, and its various associated secret or semi-secret societies such as the British Round Table Group, the Bilderberg Group and the Trilateral Commission. We reject all these and the world government project they promote. All seek to supplant the nation we love, and that is the safeguard of our freedom. B. Immigration. Secondly, an important way in which the elite undermines the nation is through immigration. This is, of course, a highly contentious subject. Most people believe there should be some immigration into our lands. Selfishly, this can provide skills we lack, and unselfishly, we owe a duty to people in desperate straits in foreign lands. In favour of immigration, it is clear that most people from abroad who in the past have become a permanent part of our national life have benefited the nation enormously and now inform its character in a positive way. No one should regret. But it stands to reason that this process of immigration must be gradual, and it has largely been in the past, at least up to the influx of EU citizens who could take up abode in Britain as of right. The pressure of immigration from the Third World now produces a constant stream of stories of sad outcomes to desperate attempts to come to our country and others. The figures for such attempts continue to grow alarmingly. Many more enter the country undetected. Many of the problems of the Third World derive directly from the conduct of the UK and other countries and their agencies, such as the IMF. The EU deliberately holds Africa down by dumping surplus produce on its countries, wiping out the home producers. Many of the problems of Second World nations derive directly from our waging wars, overt or covert, on them. These wars serve no group outside the parasitic elite and their lackeys. Ultimately, the only way to address these problems is by helping the less developed countries. This requires a view of extended civilization that is automatically alien to thinking that is controlled by the elite, but natural to that of the rest of humanity. While gradual immigration has a modest long-term impact on the nation, sudden waves of immigration create a shock. The character of the nation is not something to defend as an immobile force. It is the way of the world to change and react. But excess immigration can create problems for the nation that will not be equally borne, and so can create strife that begins to tear the nation apart. This is why the parasitic elite, in their quest to undermine the nation, favour uncontrolled immigration of the kind membership of the EU guaranteed. Their captured helpers have no problem in allowing economic migrants from the third world entering the country with little control. Our view of the nation here is of one of a family of nations that comprise civilization, and movements of people across borders is natural to this view. But if we are welcoming immigrants only because we need their skills, then that means we are failing in training our own citizens. And it also means we are depriving other nations of skills in which they have invested. This iniquity cannot be in the service of civilization. C. Undermining national identity. Thirdly, the elite seek to undermine our sense of national identity. They do this mainly through their captured helpers in left-wing liberalism, whose main assault on national identity is to claim other forms of identity as primary. There are many aspects of identity that each person has, as well as their nationhood. Our families and the jobs we do are key to our identity. And lest we forget, being human is fundamental to our identity. Our identity is who we are and what we are. It is our place in society, even in civilization. It refers to our primal need to belong, without which we are lost and our life lacks meaning. But liberals attempt to distort and rearrange our sense of belonging by redefining the terms of identity. Traditionally, identity has referred to social identity, and this means identity determined by the social aspects of your life, your family, the region you come from, your occupation, and of course, your nationality. But liberals seek to define identity in terms of biology, as if this is what matters above everything else. Thus, it is assumed that it is biological identity that makes you a certain sort of person and determines the group which provides you with your overwhelmingly important identity. So, your identity, for instance, as a woman, a heterosexual, a lesbian, and so on, become the overriding source of your identity. Liberals see biological identity as aligning with politics, and so we arrive at identity politics. Other forms of politics you choose for yourself, but identity politics is thrust upon you at birth. This is the worst aspects of this insistence on biological identity. Identity politics naturally extends to racial identity, ethnic identity, and religious identity, and with these comes the rush to multiculturalism. With multiculturalism, the nation is envisaged as an ad hoc collection of identities, any and all of which can override national identity. This we reject, not because we do not wish a diverse collection of people making up the nation, but because the nation can only serve the people properly if the nation serves the nation properly. Fundamental to this is love and respect for your nation and pride in it as defining your identity. It is not that biological or ethnic identity are not important. It is simply that they are not politically important. The nation, the law, and the Constitution regard them as all equally, which is to say, it disregards them. The nation is above all a social unity, and its most basic component must likewise be social identity. This is the family. We have said the building blocks of civilizations are nations. Likewise, the building blocks of the nations are families. The family is the most steadfast unit in the face of all other divisions and trials. If it is not, then the nation will crumble. But does the family have to mean a heterosexual couple of man and wife? There is no reason for arguing that gay marriage undermines straight marriage. it can exist alongside. Marriage is under threat from many factors, and gays being included in them is not one of them. We must rebuild marriage, and that includes gay marriage, but let's not make a thing about it. The matter has, after all, been settled. It is the raucous promotion of biological identity politics and its subaltern political correctness that assaults the family. This is not to say there's anything wrong with rights for lesbians, gay, bisexuals, transsexuals, or LGBT. They already have these rights, so why make them emblematic of movements for change? The reasons for liberals bringing them to the fore is to undermine social identity in favour of biological identity, and when you do that, you undermine the nation. What bonds a family unit ultimately is love, even if sometimes of an uneven kind. Love is also present in our feelings for our nation, and in times of war, this love can overcome our love of life itself. We sacrifice our lives to our nation, as we might for our family. These social units touch our emotional life, as legalistic entities never can. I have never heard of anyone say that they loved the European Union. And this love extends to humanity, and humanity finds its truest expression in civilization. Family, nation, and civilization. These define our identity in the deepest sense possible. The parasitic elites are not interested in any of these except as objects of plunder. Their God is not love, but money. They view all as enemies and seeks to undermine them all. Part 5. War. Dictators and tyrants throughout history have known that a primary way that they can maintain their control of the people is by gearing the nation up for war and waging war against an external foe. These wars are justified explicitly or not by reasons which usually fall into the following categories: economic, territorial, religious, national pride, revenge, defensive, ideological, imperial, destruction of an enemy, opportunities for rape and pillage. The history of war can often be understood in terms such as these, but equally, wars can result as much as, if not more so, from factors internal to the nation waging the war. War can be very profitable for some, even if for many the loss from war is absolute. The internal drive for war comes when the parasitic class has advanced its control of the nation. This has happened throughout history, but it is since the end of the 19th century that this class has come to dominate our society more than ever. The triumph of the parasitic elite in the 21st century has become near total in the UK, US, France, and other Western countries. The parasitic elite, even more than the dictators and tyrants of old, suffer from insecurity. This is understandable, as they have no claim to legitimacy as our rulers. Even the worst tyrants of the past could point to some evidence of legitimacy, however dubious. As the parasites have consolidated their position, they have resorted more and more to the 5 core methods for maintaining their position. We can now see that this 5th one we have identified has advanced even since the start of our young century. The wars of the 21st century have been some of the most terrible human history has seen in terms of wanton human suffering and destruction. Looking back, it is difficult to see why we were involved. It is difficult to see what we gained from them. But still, we arm ourselves and prepare for war. But the 20th century must take the prize for having the most wars, the most destruction, and the most megadeaths since the dawn of human history. Let us be clear why this is the case. Let us be clear that it is not nations that cause war, as the propaganda of the parasites would tell us. The parasitic elites, especially in Britain, strengthened their position in the 20th century, and war is crucial to this effort. But did not we need to go to war against Germany in 1914? No, we did not. A central section of the evil elite of Britain, known as the Round Table, engineered World War I for their own purposes. But did we not need to fight Hitler in 1939? We would not have if the elites had not engineered the rise of Hitler. Hitler was a creation of the British evil elite working with those of US and France. If Germany had been properly treated in 1980 after she agreed to an armistice, there would have been no Hitler and no World War II. But that would not have suited the designs of the British evil elite. Since World War II, Britain has been constantly at war. Some wars have been cold, but others have been decidedly hot. Many, like the war in Indonesia of the 1960s, where 50,000 British troops were engaged, were secret. Even now, few people in the UK are aware of it. Its aim was explicitly what we now call regime change. Others, like Kosovo and the Iraq War, have been more open. As well as engaging in war, Britain has been highly active behind the scenes, using special forces for supplying arms and training, as well as black ops. The Iran-Iraq War of 1980 to 1988 was made possible by the West's arming of Saddam Hussein. Millions died for nothing, but the British evil elite made money from it. Margaret Thatcher's arming of the Mujahideen, which became the Taliban, and support for the genocidal murderer Pol Pot in Cambodia were not so secret, but neither were they proudly advertised. Throughout this period, and even increasingly at the present time, Russia has been held up as our natural enemy, and the design of our armaments and armed forces has been largely determined by this supposed foe. It matters not that Russia has never threatened us. The elite needs an enemy, a bogeyman, to justify, if not war, the preparations for war. The Skripal affair was a pathetic attempt to put Russia in the dock for murdering people on British soil. The mainstream media all repeated the government account of this farce, which was in reality a botched MI5 false flag black op. It is a curious fact that the word peace has dropped out of the political vocabulary. For someone to even utter this word would indicate naivety and lack of realism. We are constantly taught in the media, the BBC, and even at school that war is inevitable, that somehow humans are programmed to go to war against each other every so often. The theory that war represents some kind of necessary purging that humans must endure from time to time for the sake of their society or even civilization is widely held. This is nonsense and has no empirical or logical basis. It is argued by those who want war for their own purposes. Peace is an ideal that springs from the human heart as a way to fashion the future. But the elite make peace seem fragile and unbelievable by constructing enemies all around us. They say this is realism, but it is not. It is merely the counter to the only really powerful human force, and that is for peace. The people want peace, and that is true for all nations. It is not nations that create war, but the elite who use the beauty of nations and civilizations they presage as weapons. They weaponize the nation artificially to maintain their extra-national power. They turn the nation into a vehicle for jingoism and destruction. We hold to one central fact about all modern wars that Britain has engaged in. Modern wars do not derive from an external enemy, but from an enemy within. This is the parasitic elite who know that they can only maintain their position by creating a warlike, militarized nation ready to fight and kill. We must use our intelligence and our passion to deny them access to our ideals that we wish to penetrate and distort. Remember that they are weak because they are only parasites. We have no need of them. We can remove them. We must dismiss the idea that war is inevitable and a natural part of life. It is nothing of the kind. War is the design of the power elites who use it as a way of maintaining their extra political control over us. It is not part of nations. It is engineered by those who control us, whatever the consequences. In the early 20th century, in 1902, while the evil elite creation known as the Round Table was plotting the war that would devastate European civilization as it was then, the Liberal Party was elected by a landslide on a platform of peace. Imagine that today. When was the last time you heard a politician mention the word peace, leave alone make it a central part of their message? To talk about peace would be to alienate the power elite and wreck a politician's career. The mild-mannered David Cameron, as Prime Minister, participated in the sickening war to destroy Libya and the Gaddafi regime, turning Libya from a prosperous nation that delivered a fair standing of living for its people into ruinous anarchy. He gladly joined forces with the US Secretary of State at the time, the evil Hillary Clinton, to pulverize the nation of Libya. Even President Obama subsequently said this was the worst thing he was responsible for. Unbowed, David Cameron wanted to commit the same atrocities on the nation of Syria, but mercifully the House of Commons, in one of its proudest moments of recent times, stopped him. Unlike Obama, Cameron has expressed no regrets for his part in the destruction of Libya. Such loyalty as his is a matter of the very highest importance to the British parasitic elite. He, alongside his henchman, Chancellor George Osborne, are now being richly rewarded. How such people can sleep at night is a matter we cannot address. Conclusion. So these are the 5 core methods the power elite use to maintain their position. Corruption of democracy, control of information, liberal ideology, anti-nationism, war. We live with all 5 of these all the time, and increasingly they form the central elements of our lives, not just our political lives, but our lives in general. All 5 inundate and dominate almost every aspect of our lives. But just imagine if there was no great corruption in political life, if there was real freedom of information in all its forms, if we did not constantly have the amoral, liberal ideology rammed down our throats, if we saw our precious nation exalted, not demeaned, and if we did not have to forever bear witness to and maybe participate in the horrors of wars in our time. All these things exist to preserve the tiny parasitic global elite that owe their position not to any merit, but to the vast extraction of our wealth that they engage in. We can only rid ourselves of this obscenity through a new constitution that will outlaw parasitic activities and distance us absolutely from undemocratic, self-appointed globalist scum.